Hi, I'm Susanna. I'm an indie author of 2 self-published works, Katie, a modern retelling of Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, and an urban fantasy short story, In the Shadow of Death. This video comes out August 15th, which is the release day of In the Shadow of Death. So what better opportunity to share with you how I wrote and self-published the story. In the Shadow of Death is an urban fantasy short story inspired by the myth of Castor and Pollux, and it takes partly place in the modern world and partly in the underworld. The writing and publication process of this short story took me less than a year, but at the same time it took me over a decade. Now, the very first idea for the short story is a scribbled note in my notebook dated May 11th, 2014. It basically just says Castor and Pollux, except a married couple. If you don't know, Castor and Pollux or Polydeuces are figures from Greek mythology. They're twin brothers devoted to each other, and my idea was to explore a similar relationship between a married couple in a modern setting. A few pages later in my notebook from July 24th, 2014, I have a rough idea for what became the first scene of the short story, but after that the idea merely lurked at the back of my mind for a decade, waiting for the right time for it to be written. That's quite common for me. I have a lot of ideas that I've been slowly developing in my mind for several years. But last fall I decided that the time for writing the short story had finally come. During NaNoWriMo last November, I spent the hiatus between the third and the fourth draft of Project Prehistory, which is my current work in progress, planning, outlining and writing 10 short stories, and In the Shadow of Death was one of them. For planning and outlining the short stories, I created the simple 5-scene structure for short stories. If you're interested in learning more about how I planned and outlined my short stories, I've written a more detailed blog post. The link is in the description. The blog post also includes a free short story template. I used the template to outline the plot and the character arc of the short story. Out of the 10 short stories I wrote during NaNoWriMo, In the Shadow of Death was one of the, if not the easiest. The story simply poured out of me, and when I read it again in early December, I was certain that it was almost ready for publication. But before I started self-editing it, I wanted to let it rest for a little while so I could look at it with fresh eyes to see if my assessment was correct. My critic partner read the short story in December as well. Her feedback was really encouraging. She loved the story and basically said she had no critical comments. So the first few months of 2024, I put the short story aside until I had more time to look at it. It's usually recommended that you let the story rest for at least 2 weeks up to a month before you start the first round of self-edits. I actually let my story rest even longer. I didn't look at it until early April, so that was about 4 months later. I knew I had more time to focus on the self-edits during Camp NaNoWriMo in April. I talked about this in more detail in my Camp NaNoWriMo vlogs, but I started my editing process by reading the short story 3 times. The first time I read In the Shadow of Death after the hiatus of 4 months, I had tears streaming down my face. That's when I knew I had done something right. The story did need some minor tweaks to make it even better and to make me cry even more as I was adding those elements. I can get really self-critical when it comes to my writing, but this short story is something that I can be proud of. It's a heart-wrenching, beautiful story that I love with all my heart, and I hope other people will love it too. So next came the awful bit, the blurb, or the back cover text that is used to promote the story. I wrote the blurb before the copy edit so that my copy editor could check the blurb as well. I'm not a native English speaker, so I wanted to make sure that the blurb was grammatically correct as well. But before that, I actually sent the blurb to 3 people who better read it for me and gave me great feedback on how I could improve the blurb. So here's the final blurb. She said she'd walk to hell and back for me. Little did I know, she meant literally. Robin and Jamie have it all. A loving marriage, a beautiful home, and a successful pottery shop. But when death snatches one of them to the underworld, They are faced with a heartbreaking decision that will change their lives forever. How far are they willing to go to save each other? Inspired by the myth of Castor and Pollux, this urban fantasy short story explores the themes of grief and loss, and love's power to conquer everything. Unlike Project Prehistory, which is currently on its third round of self-edits, I'm working on the fourth draft. I decided that In the Shadow of Death only needed one round of self-edits before it was ready to be sent to a professional editor. It's obviously a lot shorter story, but I also did a really good job in the planning and outlining phase, so the first draft was already pretty polished. My editor was Lila Lepin, and she did both the line edit and the copy edit at the same time. She had a really nice way of organizing her edits that I don't think I've heard other editors using. She did the first round of edits and then sent the files back to me with her changes and comments, and I could then react to them, ask her questions, and explain why I had made certain stylistic choices. She then did the second round of edits and sent me back the final copy with her style sheet. Her turnaround time was also really fast, but this was obviously a short story of about 5,000 words, so she could squeeze it in between other projects. I loved working with her and can highly recommend her services if you're looking for an editor. I leave a link to her website in the description. Then it was time to get the files ready for publication. My first step was to get an ISBN. Now, getting an ISBN is not compulsory if you're publishing it via KDP, but I wanted an ISBN so I could publish the short story under my own publishing house, Codex Books. If you live in the United States and want to just publish a short story, I would not recommend getting an ISBN because Americans have to pay for ISBNs. In Finland, where I live, ISBNs are free. You can get them from the Finnish National Library, so I didn't have to pay anything for an ISBN. So if you're an indie author who lives outside of the United States, make sure you find out where you can get your country's ISBNs because you might not have to pay for them. After getting the ISBN, I could finalize the copyright page. I also updated my author bio and wrote acknowledgements. That meant that I had both the front matter and the back matter ready for formatting alongside the main contents, aka the short story. Here's a sample of what the formatting looks like. I formatted the ebook using Sigil, which is a free ebook formatting software. You only need to know the basics of HTML to be able to use it, although it helps if you can also create CSS. Anyway, if that's all Greek to you, I'm a freelance book formatter and I offer book formatting services for both print and ebooks. The next step was to make the cover. I made the cover myself. That's something that a lot of people say that you shouldn't do, but I didn't want to spend hundreds of dollars on a short story cover. And I have to say, I'm quite pleased how my cover turned out. I chose a marble background for underworldly vibes. The pottery and the meandering border represent how the story is inspired by Greek mythology, and the vase also ties in with the main character's occupation as the owner of a pottery shop. I tried to balance the fantasy aspects with the more contemporary setting of the story by using two fonts in the title. The title font, since all decorative, is getting a bit overused in fantasy book covers, but I still wanted to use it as it's an easy way to tell readers what genre they can expect. I paired it with a simple Garamond font so that the title doesn't scream "this is a fantasy story", as the story partly takes place in the outwardly normal contemporary world. Anyway, that's my reasoning behind the cover. The next step was to upload the files to Amazon and Draft2Digital. I used Draft2Digital to distribute the ebook to other ebook retailers such as Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and Apple Books, as well as libraries. So if you want to read the story for absolutely free, you can ask your local library to get an ebook copy of it. In self-publishing lingo, that means that I'm going wide with the distribution. Amazon has some restrictions. If you want the book to be available for Kindle Unlimited, that means that you cannot have the book available for any other ebook retailer. I chose the Kindle Unlimited route for my debut novel Katie, but this time I wanted to see what happens if I go wide. Obviously, I can't compare the sales of an urban fantasy short story to the sales of a Jane Austen retelling novel, but I'm curious to see if I make sales through other retailers. As an indie author, reviews are really important, so I got some ARC readers to read and review the short story in advance. As of filming this, I have 2 reviews up on Goodreads and they both loved it. As this is a short story that I'm selling for 99 cents, I'm not expecting to make a huge bank on the sales. That's why I'm not setting aside a marketing budget, at least not right now. My marketing solely happens through Instagram posts and YouTube videos, including this one. One of my favorite marketing strategies is a book trailer. I loved making one for Katie, so I obviously wanted to make one for In the Shadow of Death as well. I used royalty-free videos and music from Pixabay. I found a piece of music from Pixabay that perfectly captures the mood of the short story. The problem is that that piece of music was 5 minutes long. I ended up editing it so that I could fit the 1 minute limit of a YouTube short, but I also wanted to make a full-length version. Someone might call it a bit excessive, but I really love every second of the 5 minute long extended version that you can find right here. Like I said, I don't have a marketing budget. Self-publishing can be quite expensive, but for this short story I wanted to choose a rather cost-effective route. The only thing I paid for was the line and copy edit, which for a 5,000 word short story was around 150 euros. The cover, the formatting, the ISBN and setting it up for publication, that was all free. Let me know if you have any questions about the writing process or self-publishing and I'll do my best to answer them. And I'll see you in my next video.